Did you know that back in the year 1420, keeping dry was a monumental challenge, especially for the elderly? What did people do when laundry was a grueling task and modern medicine was centuries away? How did they manage odors in a world without sophisticated sanitation? Number 5. Ingenious use of absorbent materials. In the medieval world, sophisticated hygiene products were simply not a concept. There were no disposable pads, no super absorbent polymers, no easy trips to the pharmacy aisle. When an elderly person began to lose control of their bladder, it was an immediate and pressing problem, requiring practical, immediate, and often ingenious solutions using whatever nature and human ingenuity provided. The primary method, truly foundational to all others, involved the creative and constant use of absorbent materials. These materials were the unsung heroes of medieval personal care, tirelessly soaking up what needed to be contained. Imagine a world where everything you needed had to be sourced directly from the land around you or through immense labor. That was the reality for absorbent materials in the Middle Ages. For many, especially those in rural communities and the less affluent urban centers, the most common materials were natural and free: moss, dried leaves, straw, and even packed earth or ash. These might seem crude to a modern mind, but they were readily available and had a certain efficacy. Moss, particularly sphagnum moss, was valued for its natural absorbency and mild antiseptic qualities. It was gathered from damp forests, carefully dried, and then often pounded or fluffed to increase its surface area, creating a sort of soft, natural pad. Straw, another ubiquitous material, was plentiful on farms and in stables. It was less absorbent than moss, but could provide bulk and structure. Dried leaves, especially larger, softer varieties, were also used, though their absorbency was minimal. Ash from hearths and fires was surprisingly effective as an absorbent and odor neutralizer, though its dusty nature made it less comfortable for direct contact with skin. Then there was cloth, the gold standard of absorbency for those who could afford it. Even then, it wasn't a soft, highly refined cotton we know today. Medieval cloth was typically made of linen, wool, or a coarse blend. Worn-out garments, old blankets, torn sacks, and any scrap of fabric that had outlived its original purpose found a new life as absorbent padding. These pieces of cloth would be meticulously cleaned, a labor-intensive process involving lye soap and vigorous scrubbing, and then dried often by sunlight and air to prepare them for reuse. They were often torn into strips or folded into multi-layered pads, shaped to fit the body as best as possible. For someone like Hilara, a woman in her late 60s, living in a small village in the Welsh Marches around 1380, the daily routine revolved around these materials. Hilara, having suffered a stroke that left her largely immobile and prone to incontinence, relied entirely on her daughter Maeve. Each morning, Maeve would first tend to her mother's hygiene, then meticulously prepare the day's supply of pads. This involved gathering fresh, clean moss from the nearby woods, carefully picking out any debris, and then laying it out on a clean cloth to air. Alongside the moss, Maeve would bring out the stack of clean-dried linen scraps from the previous day. These scraps were often pieces of her late father's shirts or old kitchen cloths, meticulously washed and mended until they could no longer serve their original purpose. She would layer a thick handful of moss onto a folded linen base, creating a sort of makeshift, multi-layered absorbent pad. This was placed against Hilara's body, secured as best as possible with another strip of cloth, or simply held in place by the pressure of her clothing. The constant cycle of collection, preparation, and disposal was a monumental undertaking. For Maeve, it meant daily trips to the woods, careful selection of the right moss, and then the long process of hand washing the soiled linen. Washing involved scrubbing in cold water with homemade lye soap, often in the communal washhouse or by the river, and then vigorously beating the fabric to release the dirt. Drying was dependent on the weather, a challenge in the damp climate of Wales. On rainy days, the linen would hang indoors, creating a perpetually damp and sometimes musty atmosphere in their small cottage. The moss, once soiled, was typically discarded in the midden heap or buried in the garden, contributing to the composting process. This constant rotation meant that a significant portion of Maeve's day was dedicated to managing her mother's continence needs, a silent and often unseen labor that underpinned Alara's comfort and dignity. The choice of material often depended on social status and location. In a wealthy household, a noble like Lady Isolde of Anjou, living in a stone manor house in 1450, would have access to much finer materials and a dedicated staff. Her pads might be fashioned from soft, bleached linen, carefully sewn and hemmed by her ladies-in-waiting. These would be changed frequently by her chambermaids, ensuring a higher degree of comfort and cleanliness. The soiled linen would be taken away, washed with more expensive soaps, and dried in heated rooms if necessary, then pressed smooth before reuse. This level of care, however, was a luxury. For the vast majority, the materials were coarser, the changes less frequent, and the comfort levels considerably lower. A farmer's wife, a blacksmith, or a common laborer would rely on what was cheap and readily available, often sacrificing comfort for practicality. Records from the household accounts of the Earl of Warwick in the mid-15th century note purchases of large quantities of coarse linen cloth, some of which was designated for personal use of the infirm, indicating its purpose for absorbent needs. One of the persistent challenges with these materials was odor. While moss and ash had some natural odor-absorbing properties, the sheer volume of waste and the slow drying times often meant a pervasive smell. To combat this, households would employ various methods. Aromatic herbs like lavender, rosemary, and thyme were often tucked into the absorbent layers or placed near the bed to mask unpleasant smells. Vinegar rinses were sometimes used on soiled cloths, both for cleaning and to neutralize odors. The frequent airing out of rooms, even in cold weather, was also essential. Windows would be opened, bedding taken outside to air in the sun, and fires stoked to provide warmth and help dry the air. A chronicler from the monastery of St. Gall in the 9th century described a system where infirm monks had their bedchambers aired daily even in winter, and fresh straw was brought in frequently, suggesting an ongoing battle against dampness and smell. The reliance on natural absorbents meant a continuous, often laborious process of sourcing, preparing, using, and cleaning. Number 4. Clever garments and protective bedding. Beyond the absorbent materials themselves, medieval society developed various clever ways to integrate these materials into daily life through specialized garments and protective bedding. The goal was to contain the urine, protect the wearer's outer clothing, and prevent soiling of furniture or bedding, all while maintaining some semblance of dignity and comfort. This was a challenging balancing act, given the limited understanding of hygiene and the rudimentary materials available. The concept of a diaper as we understand it today, a shaped absorbent garment, was not formalized in the Middle Ages, but its function was certainly recognized and improvised. For those who were bedridden or severely immobile, or simply those with the most pronounced incontinence, specialized undergarments were devised. These were essentially wraps or swaddling cloths made from multiple layers of sturdy linen or wool, designed to hold absorbent materials close to the body. These garments would be fashioned from rectangular pieces of cloth, folded and secured with ties or pins. Thorns or carved wooden pins were common before metal ones became widespread and affordable. A detailed description from a 12th century medical text, Tractatus de Urines, mentions a body cloth for the incontinent, a garment which could be adjusted to fit. These were not mass-produced items. Each would be handmade, often by the women of the household, tailored roughly to the individual's size and needs. The interior might have pockets or loops to hold the absorbent moss or cloth pads in place, preventing them from shifting too much. Wool was a favored material for these wraps, not just for its warmth, but also for its natural lanolin content, which provided a degree of water resistance, making it more effective than plain linen for the outer layers. Consider the example of Lord Alaric, a wealthy merchant from Florence in the early 15th century, who suffered from a wasting illness that left him frail and incontinent. His household, eager to maintain his comfort and status, invested in more elaborate solutions. His chambermaids meticulously prepared his body cloths, bespoke garments made from fine bleached linen, layered with soft wool felt, and secured with delicate silk ties. These wraps were designed to be discreet, worn under his luxurious velvet robes, and were changed frequently, often every hour or two, by his dedicated attendants. The soiled cloths were immediately whisked away, washed with expensive imported soaps, and dried by the warmth of the fireplace or by sun. His comfort was paramount, and the constant attention of his staff minimized the discomfort associated with dampness. In his bed, Lord Alaric slept on layers of finely woven linen sheets, beneath which were protective layers. These might include cured animal hides, often sheepskin with the wool still attached, providing a natural barrier against moisture, or even treated canvas, which would have been oiled or waxed to make it water-resistant. These protective layers were a crucial defense against soiling the expensive mattresses, which were often stuffed with down or feathers, and represented a significant investment for the vast majority. Such luxuries were unimaginable. A peasant elder like Old Man Thomas, in a humble cottage in rural England during the 1300s, would have much simpler arrangements. His undergarments would consist of coarse linen wraps, perhaps once part of a tunic or shirt, held in place by basic ties. These wraps might be stuffed with straw or dried leaves, materials that were less absorbent but readily available. The concept of frequent changes was a luxury he could not afford, as washing was an arduous task. Instead, his family would prioritize changing the absorbent material inside the wrap when it became too saturated or odorous. His bed would be a simple straw mattress, often placed directly on the floor. To protect it, his family might place a layer of rough animal hide, perhaps an old goat skin, or simply a thick pile of fresh straw directly beneath where he lay, knowing that it would need to be changed regularly. The straw itself would offer some absorbency, and it was relatively easy to replace soiled portions. The challenges of these garments and bedding systems were numerous. Comfort was often sacrificed for practicality. Coarse fabrics could cause chafing and skin irritation, especially when damp. The bulkiness of multiple layers and absorbent materials could restrict movement, making it harder for the elderly person to shift or get out of bed, further contributing to the problem. The sheer weight of wet cloth and absorbent matter was also significant, making it cumbersome to change and difficult to clean. Imagine carrying a sodden, heavy bundle of wet linen and straw to the washing area, often a stream or communal tub, sometimes quite a distance from the home. Drying these items, especially in winter or during prolonged wet spells, was another major hurdle. Damp clothes and bedding would be hung near the fire over rafters or draped across furniture, often creating a perpetually humid and odorous environment within the home. The battle against dampness extended beyond the person to their immediate surroundings. Floors might be covered with fresh straw or rushes, which could absorb some spills, but these also needed frequent changing and replacement, adding to the household chores. The presence of odors, despite all efforts, was often a constant companion, a stark reminder of the challenges of managing bodily functions without modern sanitation. These solutions, while crude, represented the best efforts of medieval communities to maintain comfort and dignity for their incontinent elders, showing a deep reliance on natural materials and a pragmatic approach to daily problems. Number 3. Switchered toileting and chamber pot systems. While absorbent materials and protective garments dealt with the immediate consequences of incontinence, medieval society also employed palliative strategies centered around structured toileting routines and the widespread use of chamber pots. This approach aimed to prevent accidents by providing regular opportunities for elimination, much like a form of behavioral training or scheduled care. It relied heavily on the consistent attention of caregivers and the universal presence of the humble chamber pot. The chamber pot was a ubiquitous item in medieval households, found in every social stratum from the humblest cottage to the grandest castle. Made from pottery, metal, or even wood, these vessels were essential because indoor plumbing, as we know it, simply didn't exist. Latrines, or privies, were often located outside, away from the main living quarters, or in specific towers within castles, making them inconvenient, especially for the elderly, infirm, or during inclement weather and at night. Therefore, the chamber pot became the primary immediate solution for bodily waste within the home. A common practice was to have a chamber pot readily accessible, often kept under the bed or in a designated corner of the room, allowing for quick access when needed. Records from the city of Norwich in the 14th century refer to public bylaws regarding the disposal of chamber pot contents, highlighting their prevalence in urban areas. For elderly individuals experiencing incontinence, caregivers, usually family members, but sometimes servants in wealthier households, would implement scheduled toileting. This meant assisting the elder to use the chamber pot at regular intervals throughout the day and night, regardless of whether they expressed an immediate need. The idea was to empty the bladder before an accident could occur. This required immense patience and constant vigilance. For someone like Brother Thomas, an elderly monk in a Benedictine monastery in rural France around 1280, this structured toiling was part of the monastic infirmary's routine. Having served the monastery for decades, Brother Thomas was now frail and prone to incontinence. Younger novices or fellow monks assigned to infirmary duty would dutifully assist him to the chamber pot at prescribed hours, typically every 2 to 3 hours during the day, and sometimes once or twice during the night. They would help him don his simple linen undergarments if he was mobile enough, or assist him while he remained in bed, positioning the pot for him. This regimen aimed to minimize accidents and maintain a level of dignity, which valued cleanliness and order even in the infirm. The monastery itself had a designated necessarium or communal latrine, but for Brother Thomas the chamber pot was the more practical and immediate solution. The assistance required for structured toileting varied greatly. For relatively mobile elders, it might involve simply reminding them and helping them to the pot. For those who were bedridden or very weak, it meant physically lifting and positioning them, a demanding task especially for smaller or older caregivers. The royal courts even had a specialized position, the groom of the stool, whose intimate duties included assisting the monarch with their toiling needs, a testament to how crucial this personal care was, even for the most powerful individuals. This role, while highly personal, underscored the necessity of assistance for those unable to manage on their own. Disposing of the waste was another critical aspect of the system. Chamber pot contents were typically emptied into a privy, an outdoor toilet, a midden heap, a communal refuse pile, or, unfortunately, often directly into streets, rivers, or streams. While this practice was unsanitary by modern standards and led to widespread disease, it was the accepted method of waste disposal in most medieval communities due to the lack of modern sewerage systems. In larger towns, some regulations began to emerge, prohibiting the dumping of waste directly onto streets, but enforcement was often lax. The smell associated with these disposal methods and the general lack of sanitation meant that medieval towns and homes often had a distinct pungent aroma. Even with regular emptying, the immediate vicinity of the chamber pot could retain a lingering odor, despite efforts to clean it with water or ash. The challenges of this approach were significant. Even with scheduled toiling, accidents were inevitable, especially at night when sleep could override the urge to go. The act of repositioning a frail or heavy individual multiple times a day and night was physically exhausting for caregivers. Furthermore, the limited understanding of the underlying causes of incontinence meant that the focus was entirely on managing the symptoms rather than addressing any potential medical issues. Incontinence was often seen as a natural part of aging, a weakness of the flesh, or even in some superstitious circles, a spiritual failing. This limited the scope of treatment to practical management rather than medical intervention. Despite these challenges, structured toileting and the ubiquitous chamber pot system provided a vital, albeit basic, framework for managing elderly incontinence, representing a pragmatic and labor-intensive solution to a universal human problem in a pre-modern world. Number 2. Relentless hygiene and skin care. In the medieval period, managing elderly incontinence went far beyond simply containing urine. A crucial, though often overlooked, aspect was the relentless daily battle for hygiene and skin care. In a world without readily available running water, modern soaps, or antiseptic creams, preventing skin irritation, sores, and infection was a constant uphill struggle. The commitment to cleanliness, though different from our modern understanding, was vital for the comfort, health, and dignity of the incontinent elder. The primary method of cleansing was washing with water, often cold, and sometimes with the addition of basic lye-based soaps or natural detergents. Hot water was a luxury, requiring significant labor to heat over a fire, making full body baths infrequent for most people. Instead, spot cleaning, or basin washing, was the norm for the incontinent. Caregivers would use a small basin of water, a sponge, or a piece of cloth to clean soiled areas of the skin immediately after an accident or during scheduled changes. The water might be warmed slightly as circumstances allowed, but often it was simply drawn from a well or river. Soaps were typically harsh, made from animal fats and lye, ash, and water, and while effective at cleaning, they could also dry out or irritate sensitive skin. Less harsh alternatives, like fuller's earth, a type of clay, or simply plain water, might be used for delicate areas. Preventing skin irritation was paramount. Prolonged exposure to urine, even in small amounts, can quickly lead to painful rashes, chafing, and breakdown of the skin, known today as incontinence-associated dermatitis. In the medieval world, this was a severe problem that could lead to open sores, secondary infections, and intense discomfort. To combat this, medieval caregivers employed various methods of soothing and protecting the skin. After washing, the skin was carefully dried. Airing out the skin was understood to be beneficial, and caregivers would often allow the affected areas to be exposed to air for a short time before applying fresh absorbent materials. This practice helped to prevent moisture buildup and promote healing. Herbal remedies were the go-to solution for soothing irritated skin. Plants like chamomile, calendula, marigold, plantain, and comfrey were highly valued for their anti-inflammatory and healing properties. These herbs would be brewed into strong infusions or decoctions, which were then used as washes or applied as poultices. For example, a village healer like Agnes, living in a small community in Saxony in the early 14th century, relied heavily on her knowledge of local flora to care for her aging mother, Bertha, who suffered from severe incontinence. Each day, Agnes would prepare a soothing wash from dried chamomile flowers gathered from her garden. She would steep the flowers in hot water, Then cool the liquid and use it to gently cleanse Bertha's skin after each changing. For areas where redness or irritation had already set in, Agnes would crush fresh calendula petals with a small amount of lard or olive oil to create a simple emollient balm. This ointment was gently applied to the affected areas, aiming to reduce inflammation and create a protective barrier on the skin. She might also apply thin layers of fine ash or powdered dried herbs, like powdered oak bark, which was known for its astringent qualities, to help keep the skin dry and prevent further irritation. The constant battle against odors was another facet of hygiene. Even with frequent changes and washing, a lingering smell was difficult to avoid. To combat this, aromatic herbs were often used, not just as air fresheners, but sometimes applied directly to the skin or incorporated into washes. Vinegar, diluted with water, was also used as a rinse, as it was known for its deodorizing and mild antiseptic properties. The importance of airing out clothes and bedding in the sunlight was also understood, as sunlight has natural sanitizing qualities. Bedding would be regularly taken outside and spread on bushes or lines to air out and dry in the sun, helping to kill bacteria and dispel odors. A common entry in monastic infirmary records from medieval England might note the frequent changing and airing of the bedcloths for infirm brethren. Despite these efforts, the threat of infection was ever present in a pre-antibiotic era. Even small skin breaks could lead to serious infections, and bed sores, pressure ulcers, were a known, debilitating complication for those who were bedridden. The lack of sterile conditions for wound care meant that such infections often progressed quickly, sometimes proving fatal. Therefore, the relentless efforts in daily hygiene and skin care were not just about comfort. They were literally about preserving life and preventing further suffering. The dedication of caregivers, often spending hours each day on these tasks, cost the profound commitment required to manage elderly incontinence in a world without modern medical interventions. These practices, though basic by today's standards, represented the best available care and a testament to the ingenuity and compassion prevalent in medieval communities. Number 1. The strength of community and family care. At the very heart of how medieval society dealt with elderly incontinence was the profound and often unspoken strength of community and, most importantly, family care. Unlike today, where professional elder care facilities and specialized medical services are available, medieval society relied almost entirely on the social fabric of kinship and communal responsibility. Caring for the elderly, especially those with challenging conditions like incontinence, was not merely a choice. It was a deeply ingrained duty, a societal expectation, and often a spiritual obligation. In an era where extended families often lived together or in close proximity, the burden of care usually fell to adult children, particularly daughters or other close relatives. This was seen as a natural reciprocity. Just as parents had cared for their children in infancy, so too did the children care for their parents in their old age and infirmity. This social contract was fundamental to medieval life. For many families, this meant a significant commitment of time, physical effort, and emotional fortitude. Daughters might postpone marriage, or even choose not to marry to remain at home and care for aging parents. Sons, while perhaps not involved in the intimate personal care, would provide for the household and ensure resources were available. Consider Isabella, a young woman living in a small farming village near Canterbury in 1430. Her widowed mother, Eleanor, began to suffer from increasing frailty and incontinence after a series of fevers. Isabella, as the eldest unmarried daughter, understood her duty each day. Her life revolved around her mother's needs. She would help Eleanor with her morning ablutions, change her soiled clothing and bedding, prepare soothing washes, and manage the constant laundry. She learned to recognize her mother's subtle cues for needing the chamber pot and patiently assisted her. This was not a task she could delegate. It meant long days of physical labor, often interrupting her other household chores, like cooking, spinning, or tending the garden. Her younger siblings would assist where they could, fetching water or airing out cloths. But the primary responsibility rested on Isabella's shoulders. The bond between them, forged in these daily struggles, was immense. The village itself offered a form of informal community support. Neighbors might drop by with a pot of broth, offer to help with a heavy lift, or share remedies for skin irritation. This communal spirit, while not a substitute for daily care, provided a vital, emotional, and practical safety net. Beyond the immediate family, other forms of care existed for those who had no family, or whose families could not cope. Monasteries and convents often provided infirmaries, a form of early institutional care. These religious houses, driven by Christian charity, would sometimes take in elderly, sick, or infirm individuals, offering them shelter, food, and basic care. Monastic infirmarians and lay brothers or sisters would attend to their needs, including personal hygiene. While not as common as family care, it was a crucial option for some. For example, a wealthy widow having no living children might bequeath a portion of her estate to a local abbey in exchange for care in her declining years. Records from the almshouse of St. Mary's in York, established in the 14th century, show provisions made for the care of the elderly poor, including basic shelter and food, and implying assistance with personal needs. In noble households, the scale of care was different due to the availability of servants. A noble elder suffering from incontinence would have dedicated attendants, chambermaids, pages, and sometimes even specific nurses, whose primary duty was to manage their personal needs. These servants would meticulously handle changes, washing, and personal hygiene, often under the direct supervision of the lady of the household. This system offered a higher degree of comfort and cleanliness for the elder, but it also placed a significant burden on the servants whose lives were dictated by the needs of their charge. A detailed inventory from a noble household in France, around 1460, listed several waiting women specifically designated for the personal care of the aged baroness, suggesting a team approach to her incontinence management. The burden on caregivers was immense. It was physically demanding, requiring strength for lifting and carrying. It was emotionally taxing, dealing with the indignity of accidents, the constant odors, and the progressive decline of a loved one. And it was time-consuming, often consuming a significant portion of a carer's day, leaving little time for other activities or personal pursuits. Despite these challenges, there was a deeply held sense of duty and love. In a world without social safety nets, where one's survival depended on the strength of communal bonds, caring for the elderly was not just a kindness, but a fundamental pillar of society. The limited medical understanding of incontinence itself meant that it was rarely seen as a disease to be cured, but rather as a natural, albeit challenging part of the human condition, requiring compassionate management rather than medical intervention. This societal acceptance, coupled with the unwavering commitment of family and community, formed the true backbone of medieval elder care.